two, three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Hey!
This is the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 18th of December 2017. Boston Red here on WBRN Radio in Boston and on the Boston Red Network. Nonetheless, an interesting week. We started out in Alabama, a much televised race, I guess you'd say, that had worldwide implications because of a media frenzy there at one time involving the former Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, a showman, no doubt about that, and Judge Moore, a race that Judge Moore was predicted to win by many people there. It had many machinations in it. They had Mo Brooks in the race there. Mo Brooks ended up, according to Mo Brooks, with what they called high-risk prostate cancer because his father and grandfather both had it. His father survived. His grandfather, I guess they caught it too late. But nonetheless, he had his procedure, and he is doing well. Now, what happened was this was the seat of one Beauregard Sessions, the Attorney General now, that had been in that seat for many years as a senator from Alabama. But they decided, when he left, I should say, the governor at the time, Bentley, appointed Luther Strangelove, otherwise known as Big Luther. Well, Big Luther drew in several opponents. There was Mo Brooks, whom the president should have endorsed, but he did not. Luther Strangelove was tainted by a scandal when old Bentley was forced to leave office because of an extramarital affair. Thus, he was a person that appointed Luther Strange. So Big Luther was in a hole, as they say. And Mo Brooks, classic conservative representative from Alabama, would have been probably the more palatable candidate, but yet the establishment supported Big Luther, including DJ Trump, Old Man McConnell, and the Republican Senatorial Committee, and Moms Mabley. Well, that was basically how it was set up, but Judge Roy Moore rode into the corral, as they say, the Dodge City. He was a new sheriff in town, complete with a black hat and a horse. And he ultimately ended up in a primary with Big Luther and beat Big Luther. So that was the end of that story right there. Then he faced off with Doug Moore. Doug Jones, Doug Moore. I always don't know why that is. Anyway, with Doug Moore, and Doug Moore was able to get some money, primarily because of the so-called scandal involving Roy Moore and 40 years in the past dating some teenagers. Well, that caused a big uproar there. One teenager came out, or a teenager woman now in her 50s, and claimed that he dated her when she was, 14, 15, something like that. Well, in rural Alabama, where Moore came from, that was a pretty common situation in many of those southern states in the 60s, 50s, 60s. People were married, 13-year-olds. Jerry Lee Lewis married his own cousin. She was 13. So in other words, that was pretty much socially acceptable. I believe legally in Alabama, you could marry a person at 15. Maybe it was 15 or 16. The marriage, and in some of those other states, if the parents signed off, they could definitely be married at 16. Not a lot of difference between 15, 16 there in terms of genealogy, etc., especially in the development of young girls. So that was really not the issue. The people in that area knew that were old enough to remember, more 70 years old, knew about it. It wasn't something that Moore kept a secret. In fact, old Judge Moore admitted he dated teenagers when he was 30, 31, or whatever he was at the time, which was an interesting situation in itself. But now he was misidentified as a pedophile. He was not a pedophile. A pedophile applies to prepubescent males and females. And this young woman would have been not that. So thus she would have just been a teenager, period. And nonetheless, the story was out there, and you'll hear from Doug Moore. He thought the case in terms of issues was out there, and he would have won in spite of the scandal. Well, the problem would have been perhaps a little wishful thinking there. There was a huge write-in program for people that could not support Mr. Moore, 22,000 of those. Mr. Jones won by effectively 20,000. So that's, what you had. You can't jump in there, but you did have some undecided people. But the write-in was, we were looking at polling before Tuesday, and the write-in was growing. So that was the brainchild of the long-serving Senator Selby of Alabama. And Selby was able to get it going, more of an Alabama-type thing, situation there. The Republicans in the Congress were holding on to chairs and whatever else they could hold on to. And D.J. Trump later said, well, he thought old Judge Moore would lose. Well, why did he endorse him? Well, he endorsed him because they wanted him there. They need the extra vote. Senator McCain is sick, so he slipped out of town early. I think they got a 1 or 2 vote margin on the tax bill, which we'll come to in a minute. But because of that contingency and other things there, he needed what he could get. They had decided, old man McConnell, that they would not seat the winner of that, particularly when Jones got ahead. It was Jones up and down. Some polls had Jones up by 6. Some polls had Judge Moore up by 6, Judge Moore up by 10, etc. Well, it didn't turn out that way. Those kind of volatile elections are very hard to determine because they are based on a turnout. In areas that there were more African Americans, followers of O.J. Simpson, they turned out in great numbers that had not been seen since the campaign of Barack Obama for president. And of course in Alabama you basically have a situation where you have about 30% of the voters are African Americans, and this is the same cookie cutter followed in states like Louisiana. You have in the urban areas you have African American, or you did, and a lot of African Americans left New Orleans excuse me, after Katrina. But prior to that, that's how the Edwardses of the world would win. They would get the African American vote and the urban vote in New Orleans, and then they would cobble together, being a Cajun type on the scene. Old Edwards was able, and I'm talking about the governor Edwards, not the governor that's Edwards now, they're no relation, but the rural vote. So they'd cobble that together. In other words, they put together that 20% or whatever, 25%, add on and come up with 51%. Well, basically in Alabama, they needed 21% of the votes for Jones to win. So if you had a larger turnout there, and then you had the write-in vote, which knocked down some of the traditional Republican vote. And you have to realize that it's been over 25 years since a Democrat had won anything. And this particular Democrat is at least a moderate Democrat. Some for Alabama would be a liberal Democrat. And he goes to details to explain things that are very specific to Alabama. And he's in favor of things like relaxing the corporate tax rate. Perhaps not as much as is in the present bill, but that is behind him. The old line political consultants like myself, we had a checklist of things, quote unquote, to do. Well, the Republicans are about to finish, quote unquote, the tax cut bill. Now they have to move to deficit, which evidently is not a big thing. They have to keep the government rolling. And the press is printing. So they'll go to that. But then they have what they call entitlement reform. They'll take that up next year, where they will look at Medicaid, other kinds of entitlement programs to ordinary people, working people, low-income people, the poor. And they will take the knife to those as much as is palatable they can get away with. That's the way that situation goes. Where do they go next after that? Well, they have a track that's going now and it hasn't been noticed because of all these this flummery out here is the regulations, such as like net neutrality. They have canceled that. A lot of things that a modern industrial capitalist society needs to exist, they have canceled. In the environment, they have done in the some of the monuments there, like Bears Ear there, out west. Those kinds of things that do, in fact, count up. The opening up of drilling in the Arctic, the opening of drilling, strip mining, and anything else you can get away with, I guess panning of gold, in the national parks and government land. Well, you'll have spills there. So in other words, with all this extracurricular activities, they'll will create perhaps $1 billion in product they'll be able to sell. You go into but at the same time, you'll have these pipeline spills, other sorts of things, global warming, where you literally end up destroying tens of billions of dollars in various enterprises, future development, etc. And in the West, the smaller villages, towns, hamlets depend on tourism. And if you destroy the monuments and the things of Yellowstone, etc., you got war rigs there and all kinds of other paraphernalia, you will destroy that for future years. And this is a short-term business operation. And at the same time, it's brought out, you hear from the people at CBS's Face the Nation, talking about, well, in suburban areas and to a certain extent, extra burbs, people there in the last few elections are voting against the machinations of DJ Trump administration. Now, this is a situation where people, their 401k, I was talking to a fellow the other day, his was up by 15%, some people up by 20%. The market is up. How long can the market stay up? As the history is, and I'm talking about the current history, we're not going back to the days of Herbert Hoover and Calvin Coolidge and what brought about, quote unquote, the Great Depression or the Depression of G.W. Bush. But we do know when the market goes up, there is a limit to that. There's a limit in all modern industrial capitalist societies that we see in Europe. That the problem there is supply chains start to have problems. Other things have problems. The different types of eating habits. You have the Amazon empire now in the grocery business via Whole Foods, and they are competing with some of the marketers out there, the Krogers of the world, etc. They're all getting curbside service, so you can just pull up to the store, throw your groceries in, or you can have them pre-packed. Various people, including Amazon and everybody else, will deliver the foodstuffs to you, your front door, your parking lot, or wherever you want to get them. So you don't really need to go to the market anymore unless you want to go there. It used to be large families that would shop at the the warehouse so-called concerns, whether it be the Walmart, Costco, etc., and they would pick up foodstuffs in bulk. In other words, by what we used to call the case lot. I'm not sure what it's called today. And meat in the 5-10 pounds for those that are buying that. Perishable vegetables, well, that was a little different situation, but you still could pick up a lot of those. And nowadays, you're doing that. You got grass-fed beef out there that is getting big. That's bison, better for you, better source of protein. Getting away from the old slaughterhouse. Beef is shot up with so many steroids and additives, and who knows? They finally outlawed some of the steroids, but still, people are turning away from that. They're going to more natural products where you used to have before the Depression, when the nation was agrarian. If you lived within, I'd say, 20 miles, 15 miles, 25 miles, whatever, of some farm, the farmers would come in and sell their eggs and other kinds of products. So you're getting back to something like that. You have farmers markets where they sell fresh eggs, unpasteurized this and that. Anyway, nonetheless, so the whole food chain is changing. We, in one of our presentations, talked about now with the quote-unquote meats, they have what's called eternity meat. So I guess you're getting less meat because the cuts are smaller. So all of these things are taking effect. At the same time, we have robotics coming in. We have just many, many different things. Let me get back to the script here, so to speak. And this is from Reuters. Many well-off people are that itemized their tax bills in 2015. Claimed more than 27,000 in deductions. And taxpayers have until, January 15th to pay the final installment of their 2017 taxes. So, they are running to every tax accountant, advisor they can find. Some advisors are so busy, they are foregoing holidays. And various people, they are... Lisa Febergill, a managing director of wealth planning at Wells, said that she was skipping a family trip to the Alamo Bowl football game to stay around so she can advise the rich clients. It makes sense to estimate and pay the rest of the 2017 itemized tax this year, but also working to see if they can should itemize all. Some taxpayers, particularly those in higher tax states like California, New York, above the $100,000, may end up paying the alternative minimum while limiting the deductions for a person that can take against his or her federal income tax. So there are all sorts of things happening because of this tax bill. The corporations, of course, will get a big break from 35 to 21% there. But it's kind of a mixed bag for individuals. This is according to Reuters here, middle-class workers, by roughly doubling the standard deduction. So what this basically means is the H&R Blocks of the world will be doing less work because if you double the standard deduction, very few people, and scaling back other things, would eliminate the popular itemized deductions and exemptions there. So unless you're a small business owner or something of that nature, you will just be able to move along. Now you will get, if you're going into mortgages, you'll get that $10,000 deduction. Now that's a cap of state, local, and property taxes on individuals. So some of the machinations here that have come forward. Let me just back up here. We'll get this item while we're in here. Chile, they've elected a new conservative president there, Peña. I hope I pronounced his name. He was the president once before, so he's back again, so to speak. Low ball election there, a low turnout. Had about 14 million voters out. That's a fairly small nation. And including, the turnout there was 48.5%. That's about what you get in the U.S., sometimes less than that. You normally don't get 50%. What that means is, I recall in 1980, back there, when Ronald Reagan was elected president, we had around 50%, a little less than 50%. And old Reagan ended up with about 26% of the vote over Jimmy Carter of Georgia. Well, what that means is basically 26% of the people elected Reagan. Not a very large percentage of people, so you start looking at some of these turnouts here. He polled about, 54%. This is, wait a minute here. Yeah, Pena, I guess is how you, Pena. Anyway, I'm not sure. Whatever. Anyway, he was able to poll that at the close of the second time around. In Chile, presidents don't run consecutive terms. They have to go out, as they say, set it out on the bench and come back. Michelle Bachelet, the socialist candidate, she was a president once before, and she's president this time around. They had a little scandal going on there, evidently. But Chile, one of those strange things. This is one of these business types there. They've had that in other countries also, and this is why we were doing this. She had a progressive agenda, and people abroad looked at her agenda as very progressive. Michelle Bachelet was at one time, her father was a general, killed, tortured by Pinochet. She was jailed and tortured. She came to the U.S. I remember her being in New York there. And she's a doctor by profession, trained in the GDR. But her father being a general, she went back to Chile and eventually became a defense minister of Chile. And then she ran successfully for president on the socialist ticket, the same ticket that Mr. Allende was on at one time. And, of course, Allende was killed by Pinochet's bad boys. So they've had a history in Chile, and when the Pinochet was there, he had a fascist dictatorship, much like what we have today. But Chile took the hard right. In fact, they privatized Social Security onto some of these clowns. So, in other words, nations have had experience in these right-wing things, and in that part of the Americas, they have had problems, period. So with her gone and this right-wing in, and a decade ago, Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, and Cuba, and of course Ecuador, Honduras, Nicaragua still, Uruguay, and we're all governed by left-wing leaders now. But recently, right-wingers came to power in Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and in Venezuela, the Bolivarian revolution has come under some pressure. But that pressure in Venezuela is from outside. Large amount of those people live in the U.S. and in Spain and Europe that are causing problems there. Now, just recently, the government there under Comandante Vendros has just signed a big oil pact with the Russian oil company Rosso. So they have a long-term 30-year deal. They'll be developing oil off of the coast of Venezuela. So those are some of the developments, and also they signed an agreement with Cuba. So some things are looking up down there. Now let me go back. We'll switch over to the Washington Post. Interesting story here on non-profits. The Tea Party types. You don't hear much of Tea Party anymore. They don't need a Tea Party. They've got the Trump Party. But years of attacks, the Internal Revenue Service has greatly diminished its ability of the agency to regulate, to oversee political activities by charities and non-profit. Documents and interviews show it represents success for conservatives who long sought to eliminate the IRS from the face of the earth. Under the federal tax code, charities may not directly or indirectly support a political candidate. They want to do that. And the primary reason for this, the God boys of the world, these universities and various operators, it used to be primarily churches converting a right-wing church to a religious organization, but now you can have social welfare organization, anything else. The main part of the government tasked with policing these lines is what's called the IRS Exempt Organization Division. Their budget has declined from at one time $102 million in 2011 to $82 million last year, and they're lucky to have that. The number of workers there has fallen from 889 to 642. Division lacks the expertise, the resources, and will need effective oversight of more than 1.2 million charities and counting. Tens of thousands of social welfare groups, that's according to interviews there. The Washington Post that the divisions still enforce the tax code, pursuing audits and examinations, but acknowledge the effects of the budget. The exempt division, along with the entire IRS, has hampered significantly, no doubt about that. Conservatives have likened the IRS extra scrutiny to the Tea Party group to Watergate. It was not. One of the leaders of this ring of gangsters, Cleta Mitchell, Republican actress, didn't know she was in a non-profit business. She was out in Alaska. She's a scandalous operator, actually divorced of any type of morality. But while being investigated by Congress, federal agencies found that IRS officials selected Tea Party groups for added attention. They need to have added attention. In recent years, division leaders compounded their challenge by ordering expedited approval of tens of thousands of groups seeking a tax-exempted status. Last year, the division rejected just 37 applicants out of 79,582. The Koch brothers are there. They've got their little tax exempt schemes going. The Mercy family, Lindy and Harry Bradley Foundation, they work closely with the right-wing fascist Steve Bannon, and Breitbart News and other conservative outlets getting out the message. The David Horowitz Freedom Foundation, should be the fascist foundation, describes itself a school for political warfare and openly supports DJ Trump, which openly supports Wall Street. And that's the circle that you have here. Members of another member of that universe of charities is the Government Accountability Institute. That's funded by the Mercer family. It helped produce the Clinton Cash, a book that presents a stinging critique of Hillary the Monster Clinton and the Clinton Foundation. On the left, there are groups like Media Matters, period, have described its core mission as disarming the right wing. Well, they need to work on that one, no doubt about it. The Democracy Alliance, whose members are required to donate at least $200,000 a year to the organization endorsed by groups according to documents there. That includes George Soros and various others. They collect peanuts compared to the right. But they do collect some money. IRS rules against, this is from Media Matters, says the group observes the rules, and we are partisan, not political. Now, because of contributions to charities known as 501c3 groups under the code, it can be deducted at about $2 to 1 from your personal income tax. A lot of these groups no longer even Mickey Mouse around with that. Tom Delaney is president and chief executive of the National Council of Nonprofits, NGOs, what do you want to call it, said his 25,000 member group relies on federal regulators to look out for abusive practices and maintains the public trust in nonprofits. The 1997 exempt organization was created in, well, that's when it was created. The effects of Citizens United, now that has changed a lot of things. Number of charities soared from 366,000 in 1985 to 1.2 million last year. Now, there is a Johnson Amendment. We talked about that last night. That was in 1954. Prohibits 501c charities from getting involved in campaigns. Other nonprofits designated as a social welfare organizations, that's on the 501c4, are allowed to engage in limited political activities as long as that is not its primary purpose. Excuse me. I'm running out of a little water here. Anyway, Citizens United made things much more hard to deal with. Democrats complained that the new 501c and 501c4 groups are more involved in politics than law allows. There's nobody to look after it anyway, so you can forget about it. By early 2010, Tea Party groups across the country were growing frustrated by delays. Well, they had some delays going on there. Toby Marie Walker, an organizer of Tea Party. You hear anything out of Waco, Texas? Arranged a conference call for Tea Party activists. Now, the Tea Party was invented in a political consultant's office. It was not a quote-unquote a grassroots organization. On that conference call was old Cleta Mitchell herself, included Jay Sekulow, the so-called American Center for Law and Justice. They should have called the thing American Center for Law and Injustice, but now they got Beauregard session in the Justice Department. Congress pressed the IRS about allegations. The Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration launched an investigation, etc. They were investigating Joyce Lerner, I believe it was. They wanted to put Joyce in jail. Hal Rogers, he's from Kentucky, chair of the powerful House Appropriation Committee, blasted the IRS for impropriety and abuse. In a press release announcing a $346 million in planned cuts to the agency's budget. Now, at the same time, they have a situation. I know when we used to deal with nonprofits in the 80s, it was different. An expedited, 1023 easy form for small charities that have less than 50,000 in donations. It requires no supporting documentation in less than 6 months. In 2014, even the exempt organization division was shredding oversight employees. The IRS receives more than 100,000 applications, now double the previous year. So if you want to get it in a non-profit thing, just send in the application there. But believe nowadays you got to pay a fee. In the old days, you did not need to pay a fee at all. They just process that, and of course you had, depending on which state you're in, dealing with state oversight. Old Kevin Brady, he's head chair, unbelievable, of the House Ways and Means Committee. Asked the Justice Department to review. Again, that's Ms. Lerner. They sent a letter in September. Let me see. The department denied in a letter saying that although it found substantial evidence of mismanagement, the effects, the disproportionately affected conservative groups, it was not did not uncover evidence of a criminal intent. There wasn't any criminal intent there. The same month, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, another audit that also used shortcuts over 9 years to select examine liberal-oriented medical marijuana, etc. So in other words, they played a political ball game. There's no doubt about that. Interviews and email exchanges from old Mitchell said the investigations failed to highlight the essence of IRS wrongdoing. She's been expert in that. Criminality. Gaston, Martin Gaston, a law professor at George Washington University, said there's growing evidence that many charities are frequently violating the expectations that they contribute to the public good. Well, that is one of the things that what is the public good? Well, they define the public good obviously differently than most of us do. People like Bannon and the alt-right and the white supremacists say that they're doing the public good. They're preparing for war. So we don't know. They've been burned, they have been hammered, they have been bludgeoned, said Professor Gaston, a specialist in state and federal nonprofit law. They're just trying to survive, and a long survival situation going there. We'll leave that one behind us, finally. We already talked about this. Is from the Post here. Jeff Stein, DeBonis, etc. Anyway, Republicans return later today to Congress, and they are short one person there. The old man McCain has already flew the coop to Arizona to recuperate. Anyway, the outcome of the vote appears certain after Marco Vegas Rubio and Bob Corker, who is leaving, pledged to support it. The two give the GOP the votes there, even as John McCain is battling his aggressive cancer, and he's not he's not. He's gone. He's out of town. Bye-bye. But they'll have the votes there to assure this thing passes. We'll incidentally have Bernie Sanders talking about it, what this is all about, but the Democrats don't have the numbers. The polls suggest the public is skeptical of the promised major gains for the middle class. In a recent CBS News poll, 76% of the respondents said the recipients, they would not say, the biggest benefit would go to the largest corporations, no doubt about that. This is a corporate tax bill, a business tax bill. The bottom line there is, and Susan Collin, when she has a safe seat, she just got reelected, claims she struck a deal with the Trump characters, and old man McConnell promised to provide subsidies for the Affordable Care Act marketplace in return for a vote. They're no doubt lying. But it remains to be seen whether those provisions will be included in the final accord. Again, CHIPS, that's the Children's Health, expired on the 30th of September. It is still out there. A key surveillance authority by U.S. intelligence agencies to monitor the non-citizens abroad expires at the end of this month, December 31. So there are several things that have to be reached. Even if a bipartisan agreement is reached, all these issues, the time is tight, no doubt about that. The House is not expected to vote on its spending bill until Wednesday at the earliest. That leaves a little time for the Senate to take the bill and amend it, send it back to the House. Now, this is the spending bill, another item there. Democrats, the vote represents a moment of leverage in the Congress. With enough senators vote to filibuster any deal, the Democratic leaders, Schumer and Pelosi, are under intense pressure from their base to protect spending of domestic programs. On the budget, that is a different situation. That's a 60-member rule in the Senate, so in other words, there's room to maneuver. Republicans face their own intra-party tensions, hardline types. They want the GOP to stand firm against the Democrats, insisting on raising non-defense spending and arguing that the GOP not to bow down. Well, they don't have to bow down. They can close down. So this is basically where they are. For Republicans have raised major concerns about the tax bill based on its fiscal impact. GOP leaders assert that the plan will generate enough money, they always say that, One prominent senator raised his concerns as Coker, but he's leaving, so you can forget about him. We've already talked about Senator McCain. This is all from the Washington Post. And about, I guess we didn't talk about California. California on the first of the year, if you have on January 1, if you have a conviction there for marijuana, there's a process offering a second chance to people convicted of any marijuana crime, from serious felons to small infractions, a little bit different than you usually get there. The Alliance said there are 500,000 arrests for marijuana offenses in California in the past 10 years. It estimates that up to 1 million people have reviewable convictions. At least 4,500 filed petitions to have their sentences reduced, redesignated, or expunged, thrown out. They have here highest number, Riverside County, 613. At least 375 people applied for juvenile convictions. Something trivial there, but they want out their record to clean it up. We absolutely don't want people to be in custody that shouldn't be in custody. That's Rachel Sovac, Chief Collaborative of the Collaborative Court in the San Diego District Attorney's Office. She said that as of mid-December, the office had handled 600 reductions, of nearly 600 reductions. One of the critics of that, a lot of people, this is somebody, Figueroa, the defense attorney in Sebastopol, California, who specializes in marijuana law, said the requirement to go to court makes it more difficult for the poor to take advantage. I don't doubt that. More of a middle-class situation. And they named some people here that could take advantage of it. Anyway, let's go to the numbers. We'll look at the polling. Some polling here. On Sunday, this is NBC Wall Street Journal. DJ Trump had 41. Gallup has him at 35. He's fallen from his normal 36. And on Friday, Rasmussen at 40. So he's down about 1 or 2 points there. On Thursday, PPP out of North Carolina had DJ Trump at 41. And Democrats ahead on a generic ballot by 11. On Wednesday, we had a lot of polling out there. We had Harvard-Harris, approval rating at 41. Monmouth at 33. It's a DJ Trump we're talking about here. Reuters at 33 also. YouGov at 41. They've consistently had him higher than most polls. Let's see here. Congressional, this is Reuters at 20. Monmouth at 15. These numbers are always low, but forget it. Anyway, Quinnipiac had Democrats ahead by 12. We can just say primarily by double digits, except Reuters. In this particular one, where do they have the Democrats at? 8. Well, doesn't matter. They're more or less double digits going on here. Direction of country, those haven't really changed. Right direction, depending on YouGov at 35, Monmouth at 25. U.S. Today, Suffolk at 31, 22. Reuters there. We can throw it out the window there. Let's see. The Quinnipiac poll that was on Tuesday had DJ Trump at 37. And job approval at Marxist poll at 39 there. And the generic ballot, Democrats ahead. This is Marxist out of upstate New York at 13. So let's kind of review the whole week here while we have time to do it. I guess if we go back to Monday, they had Jones ahead by 10. This was Fox News. Monmouth poll had them tied up there. Emerson poll more up by 9. They were all off there. Effectively, Trafalgar Group had more up by 5, but it's reversed there. Gravis actually came, they had it more up by 4. The hell with that. Anyway, on to the, wrong one. The NBA scores. We're boycotting the NFL, so we don't have those. Incidentally, the owner of the Carolina Panthers, a guy who's 80 years old named Richardson. He got caught in the Bill Cosby trap, so to speak. Anyway, he's selling the team. Let's see what we had here. On the 17th, we had the Kings at the Raptors in Toronto. 108 for the Raptors and 93 for the Kings. The Magic were in the Motor City. Pistons 114-110. The Pacers in New York at the Nets. Pacers 109-97. And finally, the Cavaliers of Cleveland in Washington. Cavaliers 106-99 for the Wizards. This will do it for the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 18th of December 2017. Running a little bit over, so on our network version, you'll get the panel from Face the Nation and Senator Bernie Sanders. On the shorter version, you'll have to miss out on it. Oh well, things happen. Have a good week, everyone, and happy Hanukkah out there. We'll talk to you soon.
Well, I think we did everything that we could. But at the end of the day, what you had is people like Mr. Mnuchin, who himself is worth $300 or $400 million. The President of the United States, who is worth several $billion. As you mentioned, some 4,000 or 5,000 lobbyists doing everything that they could to write a bill which significantly benefits the wealthiest people in this country and the largest corporations. The latest analysis that we have seen suggests that 72% of the benefits go to the top 5%. My guess is that 60% of the benefits will go to the top 1%. And at the end of the decade, because the benefits for the middle class are temporary, while the corporate benefits are permanent, at the end of the decade, over half of the middle class will be paying more in taxes. What we are seeing here is a real massive attack on the middle class. And what I worry very much, John, is that if you listen to what the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, is talking about, what he is saying is that as a result of this bill, the deficit will go up by $1.4 trillion. And what Ryan, in my view, will come back with are massive cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid in order to offset that deficit. So massive tax breaks for the rich, cuts to Social Security. This is a grossly unfair tax bill.
I want to get to the entitlements in just a moment, but on that question of the middle class, what the administration says and Republicans say is that, yes, those tax cuts expire for the middle class, but knowing politics as they do, that nobody's going to vote to let them expire, that those will essentially be kept. That seems pretty reasonable in the way Washington works. So is it really fair to say they're going to expire? Go ahead.
Well, they are. I mean, the way this bill is written is the tax breaks for corporations are now permanent. Why weren't the tax breaks for the middle class made permanent? Because it has to do with the priorities of the folks who wrote that legislation. And their job is to represent multinational corporations and not working families. That's where we are today.
Let me ask you, there's a lot of talk about politics here. If the Democrats take control of the Senate and you caucus with the Democrats, what's the promise to America about what will be done to reverse the state of affairs that you're so unhappy with?
Look, at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, where the people on top and large corporations are doing phenomenally well, our job is to pay attention to the needs of working families. We talk about a child care tax credit in this bill. Truth is that depending on where you live in America, good quality child care can cost $12,000, $15,000, $20,000 a year. Our job is to move to universal child care so that every working family in this country knows that their kids have good quality care. Right now, John, this is really quite unbelievable. While the Republicans are spending all of their time providing massive tax breaks to the rich, there has been no discussion, public discussion about the dreamers, the needs of the dreamers. 800,000 young people born and raised in America are going to lose their legal status very shortly. What about the CHIP program?
Right,
9 million kids are going to lose their health insurance.
Let me get to that in a second. But if Democrats take control, are corporate taxes going up?
I think we're going to take a very hard look at this entire tax bill and make it a tax bill that works for the middle class and working families, not for the top 1% and large multinational corporations.
But there's no question that in order to achieve all of the things you want, taxes are going to have to go up on corporations. If they're down to 21 as a result of this legislation, you can't find the money anywhere else.
Absolutely, yes.
So, okay.
In my view, absolutely.
All right, let's go on to now the budget and spending question. The Republicans, when Democrats have said Medicare is going to have to be cut because of the so-called pay-go rules, what Republicans say is Democrats are going to waive those rules next year, that those pay-go rules are always waived, and so it's kind of a false attack to say that there are going to be automatic cuts for Medicare. Your response?
No, it is not a false attack, John. It's simply listening to what the Speaker of the House has said. And what he has said is after they do this tax bill, the next order of business is so-called entitlement reform. And please understand that when Republicans talk about entitlement reform, what they are talking about are massive cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. In the budget that they already passed, they proposed $1 trillion cut to Medicaid, which would be disastrous for people who have loved ones in nursing homes, for children, and for working families who are on Medicaid. This is what they have already proposed. So they are going to come back, in my view, in order to offset this deficit with terrible cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
So that's slightly different, though, than following through on the restrictions created by PAYGO, which they say you'll waive. But let me ask you this question about the spending bill. Keep the government open. What's your message to Democratic leaders about how and what they should fight for in terms of funding the government?
Look, right now, it is no secret that the middle class is hurting. The Republicans have been unable to reauthorize, for example, the Community Health Center program, providing health care to 27 million Americans. The CHIP programs, the Children's Health Insurance Program, they have ignored the fact that for 3 months, the CHIP program for 9 million children in this country has not been funded. We have a crisis in pensions in this country. 1.5 million hardworking people who were promised their pensions are going to see their pensions reduced by 50 or 60%. We have a rural infrastructure crisis where people can't even get broadband. We have 30,000 vacancies in the Veterans Administration that have not been filled. Our job is to take care of the needs of working families and the middle class, not just worry about the 1%. So I believe that as we talk about the new spending bill, those are the issues we must demand that Republicans address.
All right, we're out of time, Senator. Thanks so much. Political report. Jeffrey Goldberg is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. We're also joined by Slate Magazine's chief political correspondent and CBS News political analyst Jamel Bowie. And Ben Domenech is the founder and editor of The Federalist. Before we get to policy, Ben, I want to ask you a question about Senator McCain, who's your father-in-law. How's he doing?
Well, John, I'm happy to say that he's doing well. The truth is that, as anyone knows whose family has battled cancer or any significant disease, that oftentimes there are side effects to treatment that you have. The senator's been through a round of chemo, and he went and was hospitalized this week at Walter Reed. Our thanks to the doctors at NIH and Walter Reed who've been treating him. He is doing well. He is in good spirits, and he's looking forward to heading back home to Arizona for the holidays. Our thanks to everyone who has been sending thoughts and prayers to the senator this week. We greatly appreciate it, and he remains one of the toughest men on the face of the earth, as you know.
That we know. So we'll send him again. Our thoughts and prayers to him and to the whole family.
Thank you.
So thank you. All right. So now to this week, let's start with the tax bill. Jeffrey, it's going to pass. It's going to get signed by the president unless something really crazy happens. So,
which is not impossible in this America. But
right.
You're right. It's going to probably pass.
That's right. And so give us your sense of that, what that means.
Well, I mean, I think in a broadest political sense, I think that this takes Donald Trump's pretty bad year and might move it into the not bad category in the following sense. He started his term, his first year, with a Supreme Court victory. He might end it with a tax cut victory, a tax plan victory. It's a legislative victory. It might not be popular with a broad swath of Americans, but it counts as a victory. ISIS, by the way, is on its back foot in Iraq and Syria. If we didn't have all of the noise and craziness, the Russia investigation, the early morning tweeting, all of the race baiting and everything else that's been going on, you would look at this year and say, you know what? Not the worst year for a first-year president. It's very interesting to think about it in those terms.
Yeah, and especially on the economy, which is the economy is doing very well. People are feeling better about it. The Secretary of the Treasury came on and talked about people's 401ks improving. All of that is true. And yet none of that is translating the way it normally translates to a president, which is if the economy is doing well, usually the party in power, their approval ratings do well. And so figuring out where that all stands, as Jeffrey pointed out, is really about the fact that are voters right now going to focus on the economy that they feel is doing better, or they personally are doing better, or are they focusing on the things about the president, his temperament, his behavior that they don't like? Right now they're focusing, politically at least, much more on what they don't like about the president than what they do like about the economy.
It is fascinating to watch the president who ran against Wall Street in part talking about the health of the stock market. Jamel, the polling for this tax bill is not good. Does Senator McConnell's argument is it's going to get better once people start feeling this tax cut. Do you buy that argument?
I'm not sure that I do. That reminds me quite a bit of the Democratic Party's argument in the run-up to the passing the Affordable Care Act, that once voters understood the benefits they got, they would like the bill. And as it turned out, it took a good 3 or 4 or 5 years before the public was ever positive about that law. And they largely became positive about that law because of the prospect of losing that law and losing specifically the Medicaid expansion. And there's, although the Republican tax bill does deliver some benefits, it doesn't deliver anything as concrete as something like the Medicaid expansion did that might create that same kind of bond with voters. And if you look at polling so far, even suburban voters, the kinds of people who you think would support this kind of tax policy, are skeptical about it. So I'm not sure. I appreciate Senator McConnell's optimism, but I'm not sure it's going to actually play out that way.
Ben, let me get your thoughts more generally, but also kind of playing off of what Jamel was saying. Senator Sanders just said that basically his message is corporate taxes are going up if Democrats get in control. How do you think that plays in this context?
I think Republicans are actually going to be very confident running on this measure as sort of their key signature legislative success in 2018. I think that you will see a tick up in terms of people's attitude towards it once they actually see their paychecks go up. One of the things about this in terms of how unpopular it is that when you simply get past the initial numbers, it's that people think that they're not going to benefit from it, that they're not going to see a benefit, that their taxes are actually going to go up and not down. I think that when people see their paychecks actually have more money in them, they're going to have a more positive attitude towards it. But the simple fact is that Republicans want to be talking about this. Democrats are going to be talking about getting rid of this president and his unpopular policies. There are going to be so many different Democrats and frankly, base forces who are pushing Democrats towards turning this into an impeachment election where they are going to be getting this president out of office. And I think it's actually going to be difficult because the Democratic leadership would much prefer to be talking about, well, look at what he just gave to corporations and things along those lines. Nancy Pelosi's lines about this being an apocalyptic, end of the world sort of tax scenario, I think are something that would actually cater to what they would like to be talking about. Instead, the base of the Democratic Party is going to drive this into a much more, I think, significant and extreme direction.
It does just seem, though, that the Republicans have a hard lift here, which is it is impossible not to say that the greatest beneficiary in this plan, the corporations.
Yes. If
you believe the corporations are people, then people are benefiting. If you don't, the Democrats have a very potent weapon. And I don't know. I mean, it will take time to get people around to this, but I don't know if you can ever get around to this because that is the top line observation.
And just to Amy's point from earlier, all of this is interacting in an environment where voters are quite angry at the president's behavior. So even if there are material benefits from the tax bill, there's no guarantee that will interact with voter attitudes in a way to produce a political benefit for the Republican Party.
And Amy, what about the Democrats seizing this moment, the ability, obviously, that they haven't been able to stop it through Congress, but as a political matter, to Ben's point, I mean, this used to be the bread and butter of the Democratic Party, how to talk to working people.
Right.
They've got some ammunition they could use here. What's your assessment on their ability to actually use it to make a case to people who already they've talked to, about income inequality over all these years?
Right. the best thing that Democrats have going for them right now is that they're not in the White House. And they are the party of the opposition. It's so much easier to be the party of opposition than to be the party actually making policy. And what we found, especially in these midterm or early midterm elections and special elections, is that what the party has struggled with for the last 8 years in the era of Obama was getting their base, that Obama electorate, excited and energized. Voters of color and younger voters. They couldn't do it when Obama was in the White House. Hillary Clinton couldn't do it. You know who's turning out the Obama coalition? Donald Trump. Donald Trump personally is a great motivator. And to the point about whether they can talk about these issues, I think they make I think we're going to see this over and over again. The point you made about thousands of lobbyists worked on this bill, tax cuts for corporate America, whether people are feeling it or not, I think becomes less important than the overall argument that this president and Republicans said they were going to help the working people. This is really the same old helping corporations. And again, if the issue was, do I feel it at my paycheck, the biggest group of people that are souring on the president live in suburban America. Their 401ks are doing great right now. Right. So if it were really just about the economy, they would be on board.
The biggest question heading into 2018, I think, is whether there is a learning curve in the White House.
Yes.
If he comes out of this realizing, wait, I got an actual traditional political Republican victory, and learns to get out of his own way in 2018, then he's doing pretty well heading into the midterms. But this is Donald Trump we're talking about, so there's no guarantee that there's a learning curve and that he'll return to form, even with proof that behaving in a traditional way actually has benefit.
And you saw that in Alabama, in the sense that you have, to Amy's point, a candidate in Doug Jones who achieves more than 90% of what Hillary Clinton achieved in Alabama, and a candidate in Roy Moore who got less than 50% of what Donald Trump achieved. The truth is that Trump, since he got into the White House, has effectively been offering his voters circuses without the bread. He's been giving them the same level of entertainment that they experienced during the 2016 election, without actually delivering on a lot of his populist promises when it came to shifting the way that the Republican Party would prioritize things. And I think you see that totally with this tax bill. This is a very traditional Republican approach. It's not a breakaway from the kind of approach that you might have seen under a President Jeb Bush. And that's something that satisfies Mitch McConnell, satisfies Republican donors, but is not necessarily going to satisfy the same voters who said that Donald Trump was the kind of shift they wanted to see in the GOP.
But what's interesting is that in Alabama, the voters who turned out for Roy Moore are the voters who are this working class populist base. They turned out for Roy Moore. The ones who didn't are these suburban voters. They're the ones whose support completely collapsed. And so I think there is an interesting question here of the degree to which the material circumstances of these white suburban voters in places like Alabama and Virginia, we'll see where else next year, seems to not matter as much for their political choices, that they're angry at Donald Trump for reasons that don't have anything to do with how they're doing in the pocketbook.
Right. And so, Amy, could we have basically a policy-free 2018, which would be a disaster? Because for Democrats, they want to drive down those suburban numbers, which means reminding everybody of the most outrageous thing the president did recently, and because the base of the Democratic Party gets energized, as you already argued. So don't they want to basically keep the focus entirely on Donald Trump?
They can make it on Donald Trump, but really they don't have to talk to their base and remind them why they don't like Donald Trump. The base is already pretty clear about how they feel about him. But it's making the case that the policies that the administration, that Republicans in Congress have passed, have been out of step with mainstream, whatever they want, however they want to address it, whether it's the focus on corporate tax cuts, whether it's on the administration and the changes that have been made on issues like the environment, labor standards, et cetera. You can kind of go down the list. It's been conservatives should be happy. They've gotten a great agenda through, conservative judges getting through, regulatory reform, rolling back a lot of Obama-era
regulatory reform is the revolution here. Nobody's talking about because of the circuses, but they're moving their agenda in a big way.
The one thing I do also want to say is that the focus so much for the president, we saw a story today that the president's going to go out and do more of these rallies in 2018. The challenge for him is not getting those people in the rallies to vote for him. The challenge is to get the people who never showed up at the rallies but ultimately voted for him to continue to vote for him. Those people who were reluctant Trump voters, they didn't necessarily like him in 2016, but they disliked Hillary Clinton more. They thought he was the change candidate. She was the status quo. Those are the folks that are sour and souring on the president. So the number of rallies he does and keeping that base energized isn't the challenge. The challenge, to Jeffrey's point, is going back to those people who were reluctant Trump supporters, but who want to see progress made without all the other drama.
The people Jamel said were souring in Alabama. Ben, a Republican I talked to this week in assessing Alabama, said, we don't think we're going to have anybody who has been credibly accused of, sexual assault on a child in any other Republican race. So, in other words, let's not overread Alabama. That makes sense to me.
Well, it does make sense to me too, John. But I think, honestly, Republicans in the Senate were breathing a sigh of relief after Alabama. They did not want to be dealing with Roy Moore, particularly the concern that a lot of the different staffers there were expressing was, once he gets in here, will we ever be able to get rid of him? And they didn't feel like they could. But the situation, I think, here is one that deserves a little bit more attention than just, we're not going to nominate someone like that in another race, because there was a series of decisions that were made by a number of different Republican politicians along the way that led to Roy Moore. Mitch McConnell has been of the belief for a long time now that there are two kinds of politicians. There are politicians he likes, and there are politicians who will lose. This ignores the third kind, which is politicians he doesn't like who could win. The fact is that if McConnell had not parachuted in millions of dollars to nuke Mo Brooks, a conservative in the primary, that he very well could have been the nominee in this situation and might be a senator today. Now, he has his own health issues, of course, but I think this is one of those things where McConnell needs to look hard at sort of the challenges that are going to be at the fore in a lot of these different primaries, where he may need to make a choice about, do I have kind of a winnable candidate who's a conservative, or do I have someone who can't?
Okay, we're going to have to end it there, and we'll be right back in a moment.
Moore faced multiple accusations of sexual misconduct, some involving teenagers. Many political experts thought the Republican, who rode his horse in to cast his vote last week, could still ride off to victory. But they didn't ask Doug Jones.
Thank you!
So let's go to the headline here. Alabama has not sent a Democrat to the Senate in 25 years. How did you do it?
People forget that, a Republican didn't send anybody to the Senate for over 100 years before that changed. And it changes one election at a time.
But do you think you would have won had the Washington Post not broken the story about the sexual misconduct allegations against Roy Moore?
Yeah, I think we would have beaten him. We were getting traction. We were being inclusive and talking about issues that people care about.
His stunning win in deep red Alabama came by about 20,000 votes.
Doug Jones, the Democrat, he will be the next United States Senator from Alabama.
That slim margin of victory thanks to Republicans who rejected Moore with write-in votes and a significant turnout by African Americans.
So let's talk about your victory speech. You got up there and said, I feel like I've been waiting my whole life.
I have been waiting all my life, and now I just don't know what the hell to say.
Is it because you were so surprised, shocked?
No, I was just kind of overcome. It was just being out on that stage and seeing that little sea of people, that when you look across there, it represented Alabama.
So who is Doug Jones? The 63-year-old grew up in Fairfield, Alabama, when the South was still segregated. His interest in social justice led him to become a lawyer. In 1997, he was appointed U.S. Attorney, and he decided to take on a case that had been unresolved for decades.
Justice delayed is still justice.
You prosecuted two of the Klansmen involved in the 1963 church bombing that killed 4 African-American girls. Mm-hmm. That was a prominent part of this campaign as well, and it seemed to have resonated.
It did. It was important for everyone in the state. When you're on the right side of history, you can accomplish a lot of things.
Prosecuting that case earned him comparisons to another Alabama attorney, Atticus Finch, the moral hero in the classic novel To Kill a Mockingbird.
How do you feel about that comparison?
Well, I mean, that's incredibly flattering, and I've got a book sitting right over there, To Kill a Mockingbird, autographed by Harper Lee, and she put on there to Doug Jones, with admiration. That's a real prize.
Wow.
Yeah.
With admiration.
With admiration.
But Jones says he's still a red state Democrat.
This right here is proof that you do hunt.
That was my one shot I took last year, and 300 yards, and that 8-point fell.
He's a gun owner and strong Second Amendment supporter. And while he would not vote for the current GOP tax bill, he does favor lowering the corporate tax rate. He says his win is proof his sweet home Alabama wants more from politicians.
One of your supporters who was out canvassing, we interviewed him. He said this is old Alabama versus new Alabama.
I think that that's a good description.
What is old Alabama?
Old Alabama is nothing but divisive politics, demagogues that try to divide us. You know, we are still living with all of the images in black and white and of the George Wallace era and the Roy Moores, to be honest with you. I am here for all people. And Alabama is changing. Alabama is getting more diverse every day.
That's the new Alabama.
That's the new Alabama.
And realize when the vote is this close that it's not over.
While he still hasn't heard from Roy Moore, Jones says he got a gracious phone call from President Trump, congratulating him on election night, and says he knows, even in victory, he now has a lot of Alabamians to win over.
I can work with the president. I can work with people in my own party. And when I talk about reaching across the aisle, there's probably a fair amount of issues I want to reach inside the Democratic caucus to try to pull them in a little bit more to make sure that they know that the people of Alabama might need a little bit different direction.
That sounds great, but given the current political climate, is it possible?
It's as possible as a snow in December in Alabama or a long shot Democrat getting elected from a deep red state.